The press conference was supposed to end with applause. Homelander hovered above the stage, cape snapping in the wind, cameras locked on his smile as explosions bloomed harmlessly behind him on cue. It was perfect theater, until a bald man in a yellow jumpsuit landed on the pavement nearby and didn't look up. Homelander barked a warning, then another. He fired heat vision into the sky, split a cloud bank in half, flexed hard enough to crack the ground. The man glanced over bored and asked a technician if this was the line for hot dogs. Laughter rippled through the crowd, confused and unsure. Homelander descended, shouting now, demanding attention. The man nodded politely, stepped aside, and let security usher him away without resistance. No fear, no challenge, no acknowledgement. The cameras followed the wrong person and didn't come back. Homelander stood alone above the stage, smiling as the claps died out, realizing something far worse than defeat had just happened. And as the feeds cut, the world learned this wasn't a confrontation. It was the beginning of something that would only get quieter, colder, and much worse. This isn't a one-off story. This is the beginning of a collapse that unfolds across multiple parts. Each escalation gets quieter, colder, and more irreversible. If you want to witness how relevance dies in this world, subscribe once, because missing the next part means missing the moment everything truly breaks. The fallout didn't start with violence. It started with confusion. Newsrooms replayed the press conference footage frame by frame, trying to understand why engagement metrics collapsed halfway through Homelander's appearance. The explosions had hit their marks. The chants had been loud. The talking points were clean. And yet, viewers drifted. Attention slipped. Clips that should have gone viral stalled out beneath videos of a bald man in a cheap jumpsuit asking where to get food. VOD executives noticed within minutes. "This is a glitch," one of them said, staring at a dashboard that refused to climb. "Fix the algorithm." They boosted the feed. They pushed the narrative. They issued takedowns. Nothing worked. The audience didn't rebel, they just moved on, like something more important had quietly replaced the spectacle. Homelander felt it before anyone explained it to him. He landed backstage, jaw tight, smile frozen in place as applause thinned to a polite echo. Technicians avoided eye contact. Assistants spoke too quickly. He could hear phones buzzing, not with praise but with confusion. "Why are people laughing?" he snapped. No one answered. Outside, the bald man stood near a food truck, counting coins with mild annoyance. Saitama glanced up once when Homelander re-emerged, red-faced and hovering inches off the ground. Their eyes met briefly. There was no spark, no recognition, just a look that said, "Are you blocking the sidewalk?" Homelander raised his voice. "Hey, you." Saitama turned halfway. "Yeah." The word landed flat, not impressed, not afraid. Homelander pointed at himself. "Do you know who I am?" Saitama squinted. "Oh, the flying guy." That was it. No awe, no tension, no threat. A laugh broke out behind the barricades. One person, then another. Nervous at first, then louder. Phones angled not at Homelander but at the exchange. Someone clipped it. Someone else added captions. Within minutes, the moment spread not as outrage but comedy. Homelander's chest tightened. He dropped to the ground hard enough to crack concrete. "I'm Homelander," he said slowly, "and you're being disrespectful." Saitama nodded. "Okay." That was the whole response. Security stepped between them, flustered and unsure who to prioritize. Saitama didn't resist. He didn't argue. He let himself be guided away, apologizing once for being in the way. The cameras followed him. Homelander stood alone, heat vision flaring reflexively as the crowd's attention drifted somewhere else. He tried to reclaim it, flexing, shouting, launching skyward in a sonic boom, but the moment had passed. For the first time in his life, the audience had found something more interesting. The boys watched the footage from a safe house, stunned. "That's it?" Huey asked. "That's the guy." Butcher leaned forward, eyes narrowed. No posture in, no fear response. That's not normal. Frenchie rewound the clip. He does not care, he said softly. That is dangerous. Vought moved fast. They issued a statement reframing the incident as a controlled civilian interaction. They downplayed the laughter. They emphasized Homelander's composure. They tried to bury the clips under sponsored content and patriotic montages. But the internet didn't bite. Memes spread, side-by-side comparisons, expectation versus reality. The phrase "flying guy" trended for hours. Homelander's name didn't. That night, Homelander confronted a room full of executives. "Fix it," he said, packing. "Make them watch." They tried. They booked appearances. They staged rescues. They orchestrated threats that Homelander could neutralize on camera. Each time, the numbers dipped the moment Saitama appeared in the background of a shot, walking past a disaster zone with groceries, asking if anyone needed help lifting debris. He never addressed Homelander. He never mentioned him. That silence became unbearable. Homelander found him 2 days later in a quiet neighborhood, helping an old man carry a couch upstairs. No cameras, no crowd, just mundane effort. Homelander hovered outside the window. "You're doing this on purpose." Saitama set the couch down. "Doing what?" "Undermining me." Saitama blinked. "I don't know you." The words hit harder than any punch. Homelander smashed through the wall, glass and plaster exploding outward. The old man screamed. Saitama stepped in front of him instinctively, calm as ever. "Hey," Saitama said, "you should probably leave, you're scaring people." Homelander laughed, a sharp cracking sound. "I am people's fear." Saitama tilted his head. "Doesn't seem like it." Homelander swung. Not to kill, to dominate, to remind. Saitama caught the punch with 2 fingers. The impact didn't echo, it didn't shockwave, it just stopped. Saitama looked at Homelander's fist like it was an inconvenience. "You're gonna break the building." He let go. Homelander staggered back, more confused than hurt. "Why aren't you fighting?" Saitama shrugged. "You're not attacking anyone important." That did it. Homelander screamed and unloaded everything. Speed, strength, heat vision tearing through the apartment. Walls disintegrated. The floor collapsed. Saitama moved just enough to shield civilians, redirecting force with casual precision. He never struck back. When it was over, Homelander hovered amid the wreckage, panting, waiting for applause that never came. Saitama dusted himself off, checked on the old man, and called emergency services. Then he walked away. No finishing blow, no declaration. Homelander chased him into the street, shouting threats that echoed uselessly between buildings. Doors stayed shut. Windows stayed dark. No one watched. The boys arrived too late to intervene, and too early to understand. "He didn't beat him," Huey whispered. Butcher's face was pale. "No, he made him small." That night, Homelander stared at his reflection in a tower of glass, replaying the moment again and again. Not the punch. The dismissal. Somewhere across the city, Saitama sat on a bench eating discounted fries, unaware he'd just broken the most powerful man in the world without trying. And as the feeds quietly shifted away from Homelander for the first time in decades, something irreversible began. Because once fear stops working, nothing ever feels the same again. The next morning, Vought's analytics team confirmed what Homelander already felt in his bones. Fear wasn't converting anymore. Viewership spikes tied to Homelander's appearances showed sharp drop-offs the moment his segments began. Rescue footage that once dominated feeds now plateaued beneath reaction clips of Saitama quietly lifting debris, holding doors, asking simple questions no one had ever asked a soup on camera. The contrast was brutal. One was spectacle. The other was inconvenience handled without ceremony. Homelander tried to fix it the only way he knew how. He went live. The broadcast was unannounced, raw, meant to feel intimate. Homelander hovered against a city skyline, eyes hard, voice steady. He spoke about responsibility, about threats, about what happened when people stopped respecting power. He named no one, but everyone knew who he meant. The numbers climbed for 30 seconds. Then Saitama walked into frame behind him. Not dramatically, not intentionally. He was carrying a bag of groceries, paused, squinted at the camera, and stepped out of view like he'd accidentally wandered onto a set. The comments exploded, not in outrage but mockery. Clips were cut instantly. The moment drowned the message. Homelander cut the feed. In a boardroom miles away, Vought executives stared at the silence that followed. "We need to reassert dominance," one of them said. "Escalate the threat profile." They found one quickly. A hostage situation was engineered downtown. Controlled variables, predictable outcome. Homelander would arrive, eliminate the threat, and reclaim the narrative. Cameras were in place, talking points ready. Homelander arrived first, killing the hostage-taker with surgical force. Clean, efficient, the cameras rolled, the crowd watched. Then Saitama showed up. Not summoned, not late, just there holding a door open for paramedics Homelander hadn't waited for. He nodded at the body, then at the cameras. "You could have just knocked him out." Homelander snapped. He grabbed Saitama by the collar and lifted him into the air, shouting about consequences, about respect, about what happens when people forget who keeps them safe. The crowd didn't cheer. They leaned back, uncomfortable. Saitama looked at the grip on his suit. "You're wrinkling it." Homelander threw him through a bus. The bus crumpled. People screamed. Saitama walked out of the wreckage, brushing glass from his head, unharmed, annoyed. He waved the paramedics through again and pointed to the injured. "Help them first," he said. "He's fine." The cameras stayed on Saitama. Homelander landed, eyes wide, scanning the crowd for fear that didn't come. He tried again, heat vision slicing the air inches from Saitama's face, carving warnings into concrete. Saitama stepped aside, board blocking debris from hitting a child with one hand. "No one's scared," Huey whispered from a nearby rooftop, binoculars shaking. "They're embarrassed for him." Butcher's jaw tightened. "That's worse." Homelander finally struck Saitama square in the chest, full force. The impact thundered, but Saitama didn't move. He looked down, then up. "Are you done?" he asked. Homelander froze. The question wasn't defiant. It wasn't mocking. It was logistical. Saitama gently pushed Homelander's arm away, not striking, just making space. "You're causing problems," he added. "I'm trying to get groceries home." He turned his back. The crowd murmured. Phones dipped. Attention shifted. The moment Homelander needed the confrontation, the dominance slipped away like smoke. Vought pulled the feeds. By evening, the damage was undeniable. Sponsors paused. Polls dipped. Analysts used phrases like brand dilution and symbol fatigue. Homelander was no longer terrifying. He was loud. Homelander confronted Saitama again that night, this time in an empty warehouse lit by flickering fluorescents. No cameras, no audience, just the two of them. "You're doing this on purpose," Homelander said, voice shaking. "You're making me look weak." Saitama set his groceries down. "I don't think about you." That was the knife. Homelander attacked, not with strategy but desperation. He unleashed everything, faster and harder than before, trying to force a reaction. Saitama moved only when necessary, redirecting blows, stepping aside, minimizing damage. The warehouse collapsed around them. When it ended, Homelander hovered amid the ruins, chest heaving, eyes searching for validation that didn't exist. Saitama picked up a dented carton of eggs and sighed. These were on sale. Homelander screamed. Not in rage. In loss. He tried to threaten, to bargain, to demand recognition. Each word landed heavier than the last, collapsing under its own need. Saitama listened, expression unchanged, then shouldered his bag. "You should talk to someone," Saitama said. "You seem stressed." He walked past Homelander without another glance. Outside, the city didn't react. No sirens, no cheers, just a normal night continuing. The boys watched from afar, stunned. "He didn't beat him," MM said again, quieter now. Butcher nodded. "He took his oxygen." By morning, the phrase trended worldwide. Fear doesn't work anymore. Homelander locked himself in a studio and recorded a speech that never aired. He punched a mirror and stared at the cracks, seeing not a god, but a man who needed to be seen and couldn't make anyone look. Across town, Saitama ate cold noodles on his couch, flipping channels, annoyed that nothing good was on. The world was changing, not because power had shifted, but because attention had. And for someone who lived on fear, being ignored was the beginning of the end. Vought lost control on a Tuesday. Not publicly, not all at once. Control eroded the way rot spread, quietly, invisibly, until weight was applied and everything collapsed under its own certainty. The first sign was internal. Focus groups stopped responding the way they were supposed to. Carefully engineered clips of Homelander rescuing civilians tested poorly against raw phone footage of Saitama standing off to the side, holding a collapsing beam with one hand while paramedics worked underneath. No music, no framing, no branding, just competence without ceremony. Vaught's analysts didn't know how to model that. "He's not aspirational," one executive argued. "He's not inspirational, he doesn't sell anything." "That's the problem," another replied. "People trust him." Trust had never been part of the equation. Homelander felt the shift immediately. He didn't need data. He felt it in the way crowds reacted, hesitation instead of awe, curiosity instead of fear. People didn't flinch when he landed anymore. They watched, measured, waited to see if Saitama was nearby. That comparison ate at him. Vought tried to course correct. They pushed a new narrative framing Saitama as reckless, unregulated, dangerous through indifference. Pundits appeared on every network, asking carefully loaded questions about accountability and oversight. If power didn't answer to anyone, how could it be trusted? It might have worked if Saitama had cared enough to respond. He didn't. When asked for comment outside a disaster zone, he blinked and said, "I don't know what they're talking about," before walking off because he was late for a sale. The clip went viral not because of what he said, but because of how little it mattered to him. The boys watched the narrative fracture from the sidelines. "They can't hook him," Huey said, scrolling through feeds. "No ego, no angle." Butcher scowled, "which means they'll stop trying to frame him and start using him." He was right. Vought shifted tactics. Instead of attacking Saitama directly, they began positioning Homelander as necessary. Not better, necessary. They emphasized threats that required decisive force, situations where restraint looked like negligence, crises engineered to demand spectacle. Homelander was deployed aggressively. The first time it backfired. A chemical plant fire spiraled out of control after Homelander arrived too quickly, collapsing structural supports with brute force. Saitama showed up minutes later, stabilized the remaining structures, evacuated workers, and neutralized the fire with controlled shockwaves that didn't damage the surrounding area. The aftermath footage told the story Vought couldn't stop. Homelander left destruction. Saitama left resolution. Vought blamed timing, then logistics, then coincidence. The audience stopped believing them. The breaking point came during a live city council hearing meant to reassure the public. Homelander stood behind the podium like a statue of authority, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room for dissent. Someone asked a question they weren't supposed to. If he's so important, the woman said, voice shaking but clear, why does everything get worse when he shows up first? The room froze. Homelander stared at her. Say that again, he said. She swallowed. People die less when the other guy's there. The silence that followed was catastrophic. Homelander didn't explode. He smiled. And that scared everyone. Vought cut the feed. The clip leaked anyway. By evening, internal confidence collapsed. Executives argued openly. Share prices dipped. Contracts stalled. The myth they had built, the idea that fear equaled safety, was unraveling. Homelander confronted his handlers that night. They're comparing me to him, he said, voice low. Fix it. They tried to placate him, to soothe, to promise adjustments. He crushed a table with one hand. I am not being replaced. They didn't say the word. They didn't have to. Homelander found Saitama again the next day at a collapsed overpass. No cameras, no audience, just workers clearing debris and a few civilians waiting patiently while Saitama lifted slabs of concrete one by one. Homelander landed hard enough to shake the ground. Saitama glanced over. Careful, he said, there are people under there. Homelander laughed brittle. You think this is about them? Saitama set the slab down gently. It usually is. Homelander stepped closer. You don't get it, you don't belong here, you didn't earn this. Saitama wiped his hands on his gloves. Earn what? The question was sincere. Homelander's face twisted. Their attention, their trust, there. He stopped. Because the word fear no longer fit. Saitama looked past him at a trapped worker waving weakly from beneath debris. Hold on, he said, and stepped around Homelander without hesitation. Homelander grabbed his arm. Saitama stopped. For the first time there was a flicker of irritation, not anger, not threat, just impatience. Let go, he said. Homelander didn't. The ground cracked under the pressure of his grip. Heat vision flared inches from Saitama's face, lighting the dust-filled air. Look at me, Homelander demanded. Say it, say I matter. Saitama looked at him. Really looked. And said nothing. He gently removed Homelander's hand, not with force but inevitability, and went back to work. The worker was freed moments later, coughing but alive. Applause broke out, not loud, not orchestrated, real. Homelander hovered there, invisible. That was the moment the narrative died. Not because Saitama replaced Homelander, but because Homelander could no longer compete with someone who wasn't competing at all. Vought released a final statement that night, framing the situation as a misunderstanding of roles. It satisfied no one. The boys watched the fallout with grim understanding. He's lost it, Butcher said, and when he does, it won't be for attention. Huey nodded. It'll be because there's nothing left. Homelander returned to the tower and stared out at the city that no longer flinched when he passed overhead. He replayed footage again and again, not of Saitama winning, but of Saitama walking away. No triumph. No acknowledgement. Just absence. And absence, Homelander realized too late, was the one thing he had never learned how to survive. Outside, the world adjusted. People didn't cheer Saitama. They stopped needing Homelander. And as the story Vought built finally collapsed under the weight of indifference, something far more dangerous took its place. A world that no longer believed fear was necessary. And a God who had no idea what to do without it. Homelander stopped sleeping. Not because he was afraid of nightmares, but because being unconscious meant being absent. And absence was the one state he could no longer tolerate. Every hour he wasn't seen felt like another inch of ground lost, another reminder that the world kept moving without checking whether he approved. The tower screens played on loop, muted footage cycling through news segments, social feeds, amateur clips. Saitama appeared constantly, never centered, never framed as a hero, just present, carrying rubble, standing in the background, leaving before interviews could start. Homelander searched for himself in the same feeds. He found reactions instead. People analyzing him, comparing him, talking around him. That hurt more than hatred ever had. Vought tried to intervene, but desperation had made Homelander unpredictable. He rejected handlers, canceled appearances, abandoned scripted rescues mid-flight if cameras weren't positioned correctly. Every attempt to reassert control only highlighted how much of it he had lost. So he escalated. Not with violence yet. With spectacle. Homelander announced a global address without Vaught's approval, hijacking satellite bandwidth the way he used to without consequence. He hovered above a major city at dusk, cape billowing, posture perfect. This was supposed to be a reset, a reminder. "My fellow Americans," he began, voice booming across the skyline. "We live in dangerous times. Threats hide behind smiles. Power without accountability puts us all at risk." The speech was polished, practiced. The audience response was. Comments scrolled past in real time on secondary feeds. Confusion, sarcasm, boredom. People waited for something to happen. When it didn't, they tabbed away. Halfway through the address, a construction crane in the distance buckled unexpectedly. Steel screamed. Workers scattered. Saitama appeared before Homelander finished his sentence. He didn't look up at the speech. He didn't wait for permission. He leapt, caught the crane mid-collapse and stabilized it with a single controlled motion. No boom, no flash, just immediate resolution. The camera feeds shifted automatically. Homelander's words continued, but no one was watching. He faltered. Just for a second. That pause was fatal. The speech ended early. The feed cut. Vought executives shouted into dead lines. Homelander hovered there alone, city lights blinking indifferently beneath him. The boys watched the collapse from a borrowed van parked 3 blocks away. "He's spiraling," Butcher muttered, "not outward, inward." Huey nodded. "He needs a reaction." "And he's not gonna get it the way he wants," MM added. That night, Homelander went looking for Saitama. Not to fight. To be seen. He found him in a grocery store aisle, comparing prices with visible irritation. No disguise, no entourage, just a man annoyed by inflation. Homelander landed in the aisle, shelves rattling. Shoppers froze. Saitama looked over. "Oh, you again." Homelander swallowed hard. "Why do they care about you?" Saitama considered the question, then shrugged. "I don't think they do." "That's a lie," Homelander snapped. "They watch you, they talk about you." Saitama picked up a carton and frowned. "This one's expired." Homelander's voice cracked. "Say it, say you're doing this to me." Saitama looked at him, eyes flat honest. "I'm just doing stuff." That answer broke something. Homelander grabbed the shelf and tore it from the floor, cans exploding across the aisle. Shoppers screamed and ran. He hovered inches from Saitama's face, eyes wild. "Fight me," he demanded. "Make this matter." Saitama stepped aside, letting falling debris crash harmlessly behind him. "You're causing a mess." "I am the mess," Homelander shouted. Saitama paused, not because he was threatened, but because the store clerk was shaking behind the counter. "Go outside," Saitama said calmly. "You're scaring people." Homelander laughed high and hollow. "Good." He flew out through the front of the store, ripping the doors off their hinges. Saitama followed, slower, carrying a dropped basket and setting it gently on the sidewalk before stepping outside. The street was empty. Sirens wailed in the distance. Homelander hovered there, waiting. Nothing happened. No cheering crowd, no cameras, no backup. Just silence. He attacked then, not strategically, not theatrically. He swung because he needed impact. Saitama caught the blow with one hand and gently redirected it into the pavement, creating a crater that swallowed the shock. "Stop," Saitama said. Homelander pulled back, breathing hard. "Why won't you hit me?" Saitama released his grip, "Because that's not the problem." Homelander froze. "If I hit you," Saitama continued, "you'll just feel important for a second. Then what?" The words weren't cruel. They were accurate. Homelander's face twisted as the implication sank in. "I'm not nothing." Saitama nodded, "Didn't say you were." That was worse. He turned to leave. Homelander screamed after him, unleashing heat vision that carved a glowing line across the street, missing Saitama by inches. Saitama didn't turn back. "Hey," he said over his shoulder, "you should probably stop. This isn't helping." Homelander hovered there, fists shaking, watching the back of a man who wouldn't even grant him the dignity of hatred. Vought tried to salvage the incident, but clips spread faster than spin. Homelander screaming in an empty street, Saitama walking away. The contrast was undeniable. Public opinion shifted again, not towards Saitama, but away from Homelander. People didn't ask if Homelander was dangerous anymore. They asked if he was necessary. That question spread like a virus. Sups whispered it in private. Politicians avoided his calls. Sponsors pulled out quietly. Vaught's stock dipped further. Relevance bled out of him in measurable increments. The boys regrouped that night, tension thick. "This ends bad," Huey said. "He's gonna do something big." Butcher nodded. "Aye, when a bloke like that realizes he's irrelevant, he doesn't fade away. He explodes." Homelander returned to the tower and stood before the window, city lights reflecting off his eyes. For the first time, he didn't see admiration when he looked out. He saw a world that no longer needed him to be afraid. And somewhere in that realization, desperation hardened into resolve. If he couldn't matter through fear, he would matter through consequence. Far below, Saitama walked home with groceries, unaware that Homelander had crossed the line from denial into something far more dangerous. Because irrelevance didn't make Homelander weaker. It made him reckless. And recklessness was the one thing indifference couldn't deflect. Homelander didn't announce his next move. He didn't threaten, he didn't posture, he didn't even speak. That alone terrified Vought. The internal alert started before dawn, triggered by flight patterns that made no sense. Homelander wasn't hovering over cities or staging rescues. He was moving fast, erratic, changing direction midair like he was searching for something he couldn't name. Cameras lost him repeatedly. Air traffic rerouted without explanation. Military radar flagged him and then lost the signal again. Ashley Barrett watched the data scroll past with a tight jaw and said nothing. Every instinct told her this wasn't a tantrum. It was preparation. Homelander reappeared at noon, not above a city but above a dam in the Midwest, an unremarkable structure holding back an unreasonable amount of water. No reporters, no civilians, just infrastructure and consequence. He hovered there, silent, listening to the turbines hum beneath him. Then he punched the spillway. The impact didn't shatter the dam. It didn't need to. It cracked just enough concrete to compromise the structure, sending alarms screaming across multiple states. Engineers scrambled. Emergency alerts lit up phones. Evacuation orders spread like wildfire. Homelander hovered higher, waiting. Still no one cheered. Still no one begged. The news coverage came late and cautious, framed as a structural incident rather than an attack. Experts debated causes. Officials reassured. No one said his name. That omission felt deliberate. Homelander clenched his fists and tore another section free, this time ripping steel like paper and tossing it aside. Water surged violently, threatening collapse. Now helicopters arrived. Now sirens wailed. Now it mattered. He descended slowly, letting cameras catch his silhouette against the spray. "This," he said, voice echoing across the valley, "is what happens when you stop paying attention." The clip went viral instantly. The reaction wasn't fear. It was anger. People didn't scream his name in awe. They cursed it. Protest feeds filled with rage. Officials called him unstable. Sponsors severed contracts publicly this time, statements sharp and final. Homelander watched it all unfold in real time, disbelief curdling into something uglier. He'd forced consequence and still failed to reclaim meaning. That's when Saitama arrived. Not dramatically, not from the sky. He jogged up the access road, grocery bag slung over one shoulder, paused to catch his breath, and looked up at the damaged dam. "That's gonna be a problem," he said. Homelander turned slowly, eyes burning. "You came." Saitama nodded. "People asked for help." That sentence landed harder than any punch. Homelander laughed, brittle and sharp. "Of course they did." He gestured at the dam. "Look at this, I did this. I made them afraid again." Saitama set the bag down carefully. "They're not afraid of you. They're afraid of the water." Homelander snarled and fired heat vision, not at Saitama but at the base of the structure, widening the breach. Water roared through, pressure building, disaster seconds away. Saitama moved. Not toward Homelander. Toward the dam. He leapt, braced his hands against the fractured concrete and pushed. The motion was simple, controlled, precise. The structure groaned as if reality itself protested, then settled. Water slowed. Pressure stabilized. The impending catastrophe dissolved into containment. Engineers stared in disbelief. Homelander stared in horror. "You fixed it," he whispered. Saitama exhaled. "Yeah." "You erased it," Homelander snapped. "You erased me." Saitama looked over his shoulder, expression unchanged. "No, you did that." Homelander descended hard, cracking the ground on impact. "I gave them a reason to look up." "And they looked," Saitama replied, "at the problem, not at you." That was the breaking point. Homelander charged, swinging wildly, faster than before, desperate to force acknowledgement through impact. Saitama stepped aside, redirected, neutralized. No punches thrown, no escalation, just prevention. Every miss, every deflection, made Homelander look smaller. Cameras caught everything. This wasn't a fight, it was a refusal. Homelander screamed, raw and unfiltered, "Hit me, do something." Saitama caught his wrist and held it, not painfully, not aggressively, just still. "Stop," he said again. Homelander yanked free and staggered back, chest heaving. "If you won't fight me," he snarled, "then watch." He shot straight up, breaking the sound barrier, then vanished from sight. Minutes passed. Then the alerts hit. Simultaneous crises, power grid failures, a chemical plant sabotage. A freight train derailed near a populated area, not catastrophic yet, but synchronized, deliberate. Vought panicked. The boys watched the chaos unfold from a safe house, grim silence settling in. "He's proving a point," Huey said. "No," Butcher replied. "He's trying to force a narrative." Saitama stood alone by the dam, listening to emergency broadcasts stack up. His phone buzzed repeatedly with requests he didn't answer. He picked up the grocery bag. "Guess I'll be busy," he muttered. What followed wasn't a chase. It was triage. Saitama appeared where things were about to get worse, not where Homelander was. He stopped trains, stabilized reactors, caught collapsing bridges. Each intervention was quiet, efficient, uncelebrated. And each one stole another piece of Homelander's leverage. Homelander watched from above, fury boiling into something hollow. No matter how loud he made the world, Saitama made it quieter. By nightfall, Homelander hovered over a city skyline, shaking, exhausted, not physically but existentially. His actions hadn't made him central. They made him unnecessary. Vought issued a final internal directive. Homelander was no longer to operate independently. Containment protocols were discussed in whispers. That betrayal landed like a knife. Homelander turned toward the tower, toward the cameras, toward the one place left where he could force the world to look at him. Far below, Saitama finished helping evacuate a subway tunnel and glanced up at the sky, sensing movement that felt different this time. Not louder, closer, more personal. Because desperation had finally given Homelander an idea that didn't require attention. It required witnesses. And whatever he planned next, it wasn't about relevance anymore. It was about taking something with him. Homelander didn't go to a city. He didn't go to a landmark, a base, or a battlefield. He went to a hospital. It wasn't symbolic in the way Vought liked. No banners, no crowds, no cameras waiting in place. Just a regional medical center on the outskirts of a major metro area, understaffed, overworked, and full. Neonatal wing, ICU, trauma floors already stretched thin from the day's disasters. Homelander hovered above it in silence, watching ambulances arrive, watching doctors move too fast and nurses move faster. This place mattered to people in ways applause never had. That's why he chose it. Inside Vought Tower, alarms didn't trigger at first. The satellite feed showed Homelander stationary, hovering without aggression. Analysts hesitated. Ashley Barrett stared at the screen, dread pooling low in her stomach. "He's not posturing," she said quietly. "He's deciding." Homelander descended slowly and landed on the roof, cracking concrete with controlled precision. Security teams froze. He didn't attack them. He didn't need to. He walked past, eyes scanning signage until he found what he wanted. Pediatrics. The evacuation alarm sounded seconds later, too late to be useful. Doctors shouted orders. Patients were wheeled into hallways. Parents clutched children and ran without knowing where to go. Homelander stepped into the corridor and spoke, voice calm, almost gentle. "I need everyone to stay where they are." No one listened. That hurt more than resistance ever could. He reached out and crushed a steel support beam with one hand. The ceiling groaned. Dust rained down. Screams finally filled the space, sharp and real. "There," he said softly, "now we're communicating." Miles away, Saitama stopped mid-step. He didn't sense fear. He didn't feel danger. He heard it, raw panic threading through overlapping emergency calls, the specific cadence of something about to go wrong in a way that couldn't be undone. He exhaled once and vanished. Homelander stood at the center of the floor, not attacking, not saving, just existing as a threat that demanded focus. Cameras arrived belatedly, shaky footage streaming live before Vought could shut it down. "Look at me," Homelander said, louder now. "This is what happens when you ignore the only thing holding the world together." A parent screamed his name. He flinched, then smiled. That smile died when the air shifted. Saitama appeared at the far end of the corridor, not rushing, not tense. Just walking, eyes moving over the damage, the people, the structural stress lines already forming. Homelander turned, relief and fury colliding. "Good," he said. "You came this time." Saitama stopped 10 feet away. "You need to leave." "That's it," Homelander snapped. "No speech, no judgment." Saitama shook his head. "This isn't about you." The sentence hit harder than anything else had all day. Homelander laughed loud and cracked. "Everything is about me." He grabbed a nearby gurney and lifted it one-handed, threatening, waiting for a reaction. Saitama moved, not fast, not violent, just enough to place himself between Homelander and everyone else. The gurney dropped. "You won't hit me," Homelander said, testing. "You won't even look at me." "I am looking," Saitama replied. "I just don't see a reason." That was the moment Homelander snapped. He lunged, not at Saitama but past him, toward the ICU doors. He didn't get there. Saitama caught him by the collar and redirected him into a wall, not hard enough to break bone, but enough to end momentum. Still no punch. Still no escalation. Homelander roared in frustration, swinging wildly. Saitama blocked, deflected, stepped through attacks like they were obstacles, not threats. Every movement was efficient, boring, devastating in its restraint. Cameras captured it all. The world didn't see a battle. They saw a tantrum being managed. Homelander screamed, voice breaking, "Fight me, prove I matter." Saitama caught both his wrists and held him still. Homelander strained, veins bulging, face red with effort. "You matter to them," Saitama said, nodding toward the people huddled behind him. "That's why I'm here." Homelander's eyes flicked past him, searching for fear, for validation. He found none. Something inside him collapsed. His strength faltered, not physically but directionally. He sagged in Saitama's grip, breathing ragged, expression empty. "You're choosing them," he whispered. "Yes." Saitama released him. Homelander stumbled back, stunned by the lack of punishment. He looked around at the watching cameras, the doctors staring in disbelief, the parents clutching children who were still alive. For the first time, he understood the truth. He couldn't force relevance through destruction. He couldn't steal it from competence. And he couldn't compete with someone who didn't care whether he existed at all. Outside, Vaught's feeds went dark as executives scrambled to spin the footage. It was too late. The image had already embedded itself into public consciousness. Homelander restrained, ignored secondary. The boys watched in silence. "He didn't lose," Huey said quietly. "He vanished." Butcher didn't respond. His jaw was tight, eyes locked on the screen. "Nah," he muttered, "this is worse." Back in the hospital, Saitama turned to the staff. "You should evacuate the top floors," he said simply, "just in case." One of the doctors nodded shakily and ran. Homelander stood alone in the hallway, cameras still rolling, breathing uneven. "You won't kill me," he said, more statement than question. "No," Saitama agreed. Homelander laughed weakly. "Then I'll still be here." Saitama met his gaze. "That's not the same thing." Outside, military aircraft began to circle, not to engage but to observe. Governments hesitated. Vought stalled. No one knew what to do with a god who refused to perform. Homelander took off without warning, blasting through the roof and vanishing into the clouds. Not retreating. Fleeing. Saitama watched him go, then turned back to the building and resumed helping evacuate patients like nothing extraordinary had happened. But the world had shifted. Heroes were no longer measured by fear. Power no longer guaranteed attention. And somewhere high above, Homelander realized there was only one thing left he could attack that Saitama couldn't stand in front of. Not people. Not buildings. The story itself. And the next move he made wouldn't be loud. It would be permanent. The world didn't calm down after the hospital. It stalled. News cycles looped the same footage over and over, not because it was dramatic, but because no one knew how to contextualize it. Analysts argued on panels that felt hollow. Commentators searched for language that didn't exist yet. A hero had been present, power had been exercised, and yet there was no victory to celebrate and no villain conclusively defeated. Homelander hadn't been beaten. He'd been displaced. Vought felt the shift immediately. Stock prices dipped not from scandal but uncertainty. Focus groups didn't know how to answer questions about trust anymore. Fear and safety stopped correlating in their models. The brand had always thrived on spectacle. Now spectacle was radioactive. Ashley Barrett sat through emergency meetings where no one spoke first. Every plan relied on leverage, and for the first time, leverage meant nothing. Saitama hadn't issued demands. He hadn't accepted authority. He hadn't even stayed. That absence was worse than defiance. Saitama, meanwhile, had returned to something resembling routine. He walked city streets unnoticed, helped where help was needed, left before thanks could form. No press conferences, no statements. When asked who he worked for, he answered honestly. No one. That answer broke things. Emergency responders began requesting him by description, not name. The bald guy, the quiet one, the man who just fixes things. Each time he arrived, solved the immediate problem and disappeared again. The pattern was undeniable. He wasn't competing. He was replacing the need. Homelander watched this from a distance, rage cooled into something brittle and focused. He didn't lash out anymore. He didn't stage rescues or threaten civilians. He observed, studied the footage, noticed what hurt the most. Saitama didn't erase him with power. He erased him with irrelevance. Crowds no longer looked up instinctively when Homelander passed overhead. Some didn't notice at all. Others filmed out of habit, not awe. Children stopped pointing. Adults stopped whispering. The silence followed him everywhere. Homelander returned to Vought Tower unannounced. Security scrambled but didn't stop him. No one could. He stalked through halls lined with posters that suddenly felt outdated, his own image staring back at him like a lie that had gone stale. Ashley met him in the executive conference room, hands steady, voice not. "We need to talk about optics," she began. Homelander slammed a fist into the table hard enough to split the surface. "He's stealing my world." Ashley swallowed. "He doesn't want it." "That's the problem," Homelander shouted. "He doesn't want anything." She hesitated, then said what no one else dared. "People trust him more because of that." Homelander stared at her like she'd confessed to treason. "You're saying I should be, what, quieter?" "I'm saying," Ashley replied carefully, "that the spotlight doesn't work if the audience walks away." Homelander left without another word. Across the city, Saitama finished helping stabilize a collapsed overpass. He listened politely as emergency coordinators thanked him, nodded, and started to leave. One of them stopped him. "People are asking who you are." Saitama paused. "Why?" The coordinator blinked. "They want to know who to believe in." Saitama considered that longer than most things. "They shouldn't believe in me," he said finally. "They should believe in results." That quote spread faster than anything Homelander had said in years. Not because it was inspiring. Because it was inconvenient. The boys took notice. Butcher paced their safe house restless. "This is wrong," he growled. "He's breaking the system without breaking it. There's no target." Huey leaned against the wall, watching another clip of Saitama quietly handing a rescued kid back to her mother and walking away. "That's the point. You can't fight someone who doesn't need to win." Butcher scowled. "Everyone needs something." "Maybe," Huey replied, "but not everyone needs us." That stung more than Butcher wanted to admit. Homelander, meanwhile, made a decision. If he couldn't dominate the spotlight, he would redefine it. Not with violence, with narrative. He appeared on every remaining platform that would take him, unannounced, unscripted, raw. He spoke about responsibility, about chaos, about how unchecked power without accountability was dangerous. The hypocrisy was staggering. And it almost worked. For a few hours. Then Saitama walked past a live broadcast without noticing it was happening. The camera caught him in the background, helping a construction crew lift debris. No speech, no interruption, just quiet competence. The clip overshadowed Homelander's monologue in minutes. Homelander saw it and felt something inside him finally give way. Not rage. Not fear. A hollow, echoing clarity. He wasn't losing because he was weaker. He was losing because the rules no longer required him. That night, Homelander didn't attack anyone. He didn't threaten. He didn't even fly. He sat alone above the city, hovering in darkness, listening to a world that no longer revolved around his presence. Below, Saitama helped finish a job and headed home, unaware he'd just undone another pillar of manufactured power. Because he didn't care. And that indifference had become the most dangerous force in the world. Somewhere deep inside Vaught's archives, contingency files were being reopened, plans not for combat but erasure, legal frameworks, information control, character assassination. If they couldn't outshine Saitama, they would try to remove him from the story entirely. Homelander smiled faintly as the idea formed. If he couldn't be relevant in the world anymore, he could still be relevant in its memory. And the next move wouldn't involve fists, lasers, or fear. It would involve lies. The first lie didn't come from Vaught. It came from a senator. A late-night interview, carefully worded, delivered with concern instead of accusation. He spoke about unregulated individuals, about unknown actors operating outside any accountability framework. He never said Saitama's name. He didn't have to. The implication did the work for him. By morning, the language had spread. Unknown hero, unaffiliated entity, potential risk. Vaught followed quietly, amplifying instead of leading. Think tanks published op-eds questioning whether power without oversight was more dangerous than corruption with control. Legal analysts debated jurisdiction. Pundits asked whether trust should be earned through transparency rather than results. The narrative didn't attack Saitama directly. It reframed him. Saitama noticed none of it. He was busy helping clear debris from a flooded neighborhood where insurance adjusters hadn't arrived yet. He lifted cars, stabilized walls, handed people their belongings. When asked for a name, he shrugged. When thanked, he nodded. Cameras still followed him. But now the commentary changed. Is this safe? Who is he accountable to? What if he decides not to help next time? Saitama walked away before the questions could finish. Homelander watched the shift with grim satisfaction. He didn't appear publicly. He didn't comment. He let the machine he'd once been the face of work without him. This was familiar territory. Weaponized doubt, manufactured concern, slow erosion. The boys felt it too. This is Vaught, Butcher said, slamming a tablet onto the table. Same playbook, different target. But he's not fighting back, Huey replied. He's not even responding. That's the problem, Butcher snapped. You can't beat a smear campaign by ignoring it. Saitama continued ignoring it anyway. When authorities showed up at a rescue site with questions and forms, he waited politely, answered honestly, then went back to work. When asked to register, he said he didn't know how. When told he needed clearance, he asked if people were still in danger. They were. He left before paperwork could escalate. The footage of him walking away from officials went viral. Vaught tried to spin it as evasion. The public saw something else. Confusion set in. Fear couldn't find a foothold because nothing bad followed his presence. Discomfort grew instead. A system built on control didn't know how to process someone who refused to engage with it. Homelander, restless now, decided to push harder. A leak surfaced online, anonymous, unverifiable, perfectly timed. Grainy footage, edited clips, claims that Saitama had caused collateral damage, that he'd abandoned sites early, that he was cherry-picking disasters for attention. The irony was almost poetic. Saitama didn't see the videos. He didn't have time. A gas explosion had leveled part of an apartment complex, and people were trapped. He arrived, cleared rubble, carried survivors out gently, and left before anyone could ask his opinion. One of the survivors hugged him anyway. That image broke the narrative. Public opinion fractured. Half the world demanded oversight. The other half asked why oversight had failed them so consistently before. Vought panicked. The strategy had worked against sups who needed approval. It stalled against someone who didn't care whether the story remembered him correctly. Homelander finally stepped back into the light. Not as a hero. As a warning. He appeared on a controlled broadcast, subdued, measured, almost humble. He spoke about mistakes, about learning the cost of unchecked power. He framed himself as a cautionary tale. And now, he said softly, we risk repeating it. The implication was clear. Saitama was the next Homelander. The audacity stunned people. The silence that followed was worse. Because Saitama didn't respond. He didn't deny it. He didn't counter-narrate. He kept helping. That was when the first mandate passed. Unregistered enhanced individuals were now subject to detainment pending evaluation. Saitama learned about it when a police officer approached him nervously at a collapsed factory site. I have to ask you to come with us, the officer said, voice shaking. Saitama looked around at the still-burning wreckage. After. The officer swallowed. After what? After they're out. The officer hesitated, then nodded. Saitama finished the job, carrying the last injured worker to safety, then walked back toward the waiting vehicles. The cameras captured it. Not resistance. Compliance. That image hit harder than any fight ever could have. At the processing facility, things stalled immediately. Scanners malfunctioned. Forms didn't apply. No category fit. No authority wanted to sign off on escalation. Saitama waited patiently. Am I in trouble? He asked at one point. No one answered. Hours passed. Outside, protests formed not for him but against the process. People didn't chant his name. They demanded explanations, accountability, logic. Vought lost control of the conversation. Homelander watched from a secure location, jaw tight. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The system was bending, but not in his favor. Saitama was being absorbed into the machine and still refusing to give it meaning. Eventually, a decision came down. Release him. No charges, no apology. Saitama stood, thanked the staff for their time, and left. That night, he sat alone on a rooftop, eating instant noodles, unaware he just survived the most aggressive attempt to erase him yet. Not by force. By relevance. Homelander looked out over the same city from far away and felt the final truth settle in. He couldn't destroy Saitama. He couldn't replace him. And he couldn't rewrite him. Which meant there was only one option left. If Saitama couldn't be removed from the world, he could be removed from the future. And the next step wouldn't involve the public. It would involve finality. The order didn't come from Vought's board. It came from a subcommittee no one voted for, operating under emergency authority that had existed longer than most of its members had been alive. The language was clinical, sanitized, stripped of names and faces. Subject classified as an anomalous independent enhanced individual. Risk profile undefined. Long-term unpredictability unacceptable. The recommendation wasn't execution. It was removal. Not assassination, not imprisonment, something quieter, legal, permanent. Erase the variable. Homelander wasn't present when the decision was made. He didn't need to be. His fingerprints were all over the framing, the testimony, the carefully seeded fears that had made the vote feel necessary. For the first time since the hospital, he felt something like control returning. Not admiration. Not love. But direction. Saitama noticed the shift before anyone said a word. Requests for help slowed, then stopped entirely. Emergency calls rerouted. Access points closed. He arrived at 2 separate disaster sites only to find perimeter teams already there, turning him away politely, nervously, with rehearsed lines about jurisdiction and safety protocols. He didn't argue. He went home. That alone unsettled people. If he had fought back, the story would have made sense. If he had vanished, it would have ended. Instead, he stayed, present but sidelined, as if waiting for someone to explain what problem he'd become. The boys felt the walls closing in. "They're disappearing him," Butcher said, staring at intercepted chatter. "Not killing, not jailing, just phasing him out." "Can they even do that?" Huey asked. "They've done it before," Butcher replied, "just never to someone this obvious." Saitama spent the next few days doing normal things, shopping, walking, eating cheap food on park benches. He wasn't hiding, he just wasn't invited anymore. People noticed. Not protests, not outrage. Concern. The absence of catastrophe didn't bring relief. It brought suspicion. Systems that had relied on spectacle suddenly had to justify themselves without a fallback. Homelander watched quietly. This was the end game. If Saitama became unnecessary, then irrelevant, then forgotten, it wouldn't matter how strong he was. Power without a role dissolved on its own. Vought's final move came wrapped in cooperation. An official delegation arrived at Saitama's apartment building with calm smiles and firm posture. They didn't threaten. They didn't accuse. They offered. A facility. A role. A framework where his abilities could be safely studied and appropriately deployed. Saitama listened politely. "Will people still get help?" he asked. "Yes," one of them said quickly, "through proper channels." Saitama nodded, then okay. That answer sent shockwaves through every monitoring system. He didn't resist. He didn't question. He agreed. The transport was discreet. No cuffs, no spectacle, just a quiet ride to a research complex that didn't officially exist. Homelander smiled for the first time in days. Inside the facility, Saitama was given a room clean and sparse. Tests were attempted and quietly abandoned. Sensors couldn't agree on readings. No data stuck. The scientists grew uncomfortable fast. "This isn't containment," one whispered. "It's theater." And theater required an audience. Homelander arrived the next day. Not in costume. Not hovering. He walked in like an executive, flanked by security, eyes locked on the man sitting calmly on the bed. "You didn't have to come," Saitama said. Homelander stopped a few feet away. "I wanted to see it." "See what?" "This," Homelander replied, "the end." Saitama tilted his head slightly. "Is it?" Homelander laughed under his breath. "You're done, no fights, no crowds, no purpose. They'll study you, shelve you, forget you." Saitama considered that. If people are okay, that's fine. The answer deflated the moment. Homelander's smile twitched. "You really don't get it." "Probably not." Homelander stepped closer, voice low. "This world needs someone at the center. If it's not me, it can't be you. So it'll be no one." Saitama looked up at him. "That sounds lonely." The insult wasn't intentional. That made it worse. Homelander turned away abruptly. "Enjoy your quiet." He left believing he'd won. He hadn't accounted for one thing. Saitama wasn't being erased. He was being observed. The boys broke into the facility 2 nights later, not to rescue him, but to understand what was happening. What they found wasn't imprisonment. It was indecision. Guards uncertain, scientists uneasy, protocols incomplete, everyone waiting for a directive that never came. Saitama sat in the common area, watching TV. "You know they're trying to make you disappear," Butcher said bluntly. Saitama nodded. "Yeah." "You okay with that?" Saitama shrugged. "If no one needs me." Huey swallowed. "What if they do?" Saitama looked at him. "Then they'll ask." That was when the alarm started. Not from outside. From everywhere. Simultaneous failures, power flickers, communications dead zones, infrastructure strain across multiple cities, nothing catastrophic, nothing dramatic. Just enough. Saitama stood. "Guess they're asking," he said. The facility locked down automatically. Orders contradicted themselves. No one wanted to be responsible for stopping him. Saitama walked out. Not through walls. Through doors. Cameras followed him for exactly 30 seconds before feeds cut worldwide. Homelander watched the blackout happen in real time. For the first time since this began, fear crept in, not of Saitama's power but of his absence from the system entirely. He hadn't been erased. He'd been released from relevance altogether. And that meant the next time he acted, it wouldn't be because anyone told him to. It would be because something genuinely needed to end. The blackouts didn't escalate. That confused everyone. Power returned unevenly, systems rebooted, emergency responses rolled out exactly as trained. No cities fell. No death toll spiked. There was no single villain to blame, no face to put on the crisis. Analysts waited for the second wave that never came. The problem wasn't what happened. It was what didn't. Saitama reappeared in places that weren't on the news. Small towns, industrial outskirts, aging infrastructure no one televised anymore. He stabilized power stations, reinforced bridges, corrected pressure imbalances that engineers hadn't even noticed yet. Quiet fixes. No statements followed. And for the first time, the world felt something unsettling. Relief without gratitude. Governments held emergency briefings trying to explain why systems they'd failed to maintain were suddenly functional again. They couldn't credit Saitama publicly without admitting the attempt to erase him, so they credited process, coordination, preparedness. No one believed it. The boys watched the pattern emerge. "He's not saving the world," Butcher said slowly. "He's macking it obvious who is." Huey nodded. "And he's doing it without taking credit. That's terrifying." Homelander felt it too. He flew over cities again, lower this time, closer to the streets. He waited for recognition that didn't come. People glanced up, filmed out of habit, then went back to their lives. No cheers. No chants. No fear. Saitama had changed the rules by stepping outside them. Power was no longer the loudest thing in the room. That terrified institutions more than violence ever had. A second directive passed quietly. Saitama was no longer to be engaged, assisted, or obstructed. He was to be treated as an environmental variable, weather, gravity, unmanageable. Homelander read the memo and crushed the tablet in his hand. They'd chosen the quiet man over the symbol. Not because they loved him. Because he didn't demand anything in return. That night, Homelander confronted Saitama one last time. No cameras. No audience. Just a rooftop overlooking a city that didn't care who hovered above it anymore. "You could have ruled," Homelander said, voice strained. "You could have owned all of this." Saitama looked out over the lights. "Why?" "Because you can." "That's not a reason." Homelander laughed bitterly. "Then what is?" Saitama thought about it. "Because it needed doing." "And when it does," Homelander pressed. "Then I won't." The simplicity shattered something final. Homelander realized then that Saitama wasn't taking his place. He was ending the need for one. And there was nothing left to fight. Homelander left without another word. Days later, he vanished from the sky. No announcement, no final act, just absence. Vought scrambled to explain it, failed, subs fractured without their axis, some retired, some escalated, none filled the void. Saitama kept moving. Helping. leaving, choosing quiet every time. And the world slowly, painfully adjusted to the idea that salvation wasn't a brand, a face, or a god in the sky. It was a decision someone made and walked away from. But choices have consequences. And somewhere beyond the noise, something older than systems and symbols had noticed the pattern. Quiet wasn't weakness. Quiet was restraint. And restraint, once broken, was never subtle. The first sign wasn't destruction. It was hesitation. Emergency rooms delayed calls. Municipal response teams waited for confirmation that never came. Military commanders stalled, unsure whether escalation would summon help or expose weakness. The world had grown used to a silent correction it no longer controlled. Saitama hadn't vanished. He just stopped being everywhere. And that scared people more than when he'd been sidelined. A cargo port fire burned longer than it should have. A bridge failure caused casualties that might have been prevented days earlier. Nothing apocalyptic, nothing cinematic, just enough loss to make the question unavoidable. Why didn't he show up? Governments denied relying on him. Their actions betrayed them. Quiet contingency plans were drafted with a new category added: if unaffiliated entity intervenes. No one knew how to trigger it. Because Saitama didn't answer summons. He responded to need. And now, need was becoming subjective. The boys felt the tension sharpen. "We built a world where we waited for him," Huey said, staring at casualty reports, "even when we said we were." Butcher exhaled slowly. "That's the trick, ain't it? Power walks away, and suddenly everyone wants it back." Homelander watched the unraveling with a hollow calm. He no longer felt rage, only a dull, lingering certainty. This wasn't his world anymore. But it also was Saitama. Symbols had died. Systems were wobbling. And something in the vacuum was beginning to stir. Across the globe, subs tested limits again, not out of confidence but confusion. Smaller tyrants rose in places where quiet help hadn't arrived. Local strongmen, corporate enforcers, armed protectors who promised order loudly. They were bad at it. Violence spiked unevenly, trust fractured further. The absence of spectacle had created space, but space didn't guarantee wisdom. Saitama felt it. Not as guilt, as imbalance. He stood at the edge of a city one evening, watching emergency lights flicker where they shouldn't have. He could intervene, end it all in minutes, reset the scale again. But that would teach the wrong lesson. Again. So he waited. Homelander found him there. No cape. No confidence. Just a man hovering in place because he didn't know where else to go. "They're falling apart," Homelander said quietly. Saitama nodded, "Yeah. And you're letting it happen." "For now." Homelander clenched his jaw. "You think that makes you better than me?" Saitama looked at him. "No." That answer landed harder than condemnation. "You know what they'll do next," Homelander said. "They'll beg you back, or they'll build something worse." "Probably. And if they do?" Saitama didn't answer immediately. He watched a fire get extinguished by local crews working too slowly, too desperately, but together. "Then I'll decide," he said. Homelander laughed once, bitter and dry. "That's the difference. I needed them to need me." He drifted lower, feet touching the rooftop. "You don't." "No." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. "You won," Homelander said finally. Saitama shook his head. "This isn't a competition." "Everything was," Homelander replied, "until you showed up." Below them, the city moved on without noticing either of them. For the first time, Homelander understood the final cruelty. He hadn't been defeated. He'd been made optional. And the world was learning that even gods could be replaced, By choice, by effort, by failure. Homelander turned away. "What will you do if they build another me?" he asked. Saitama watched the skyline darken. "Then I'll stop it." "How?" "With one punch," Saitama said simply. Not a threat. A statement of boundary. Homelander nodded slowly. "That's worse," he said. And he left, not in anger but resignation. The next day, intelligence agencies detected something new, not a person, not a soup, but a project. Old data resurfaced, contingency programs long abandoned, attempts to manufacture certainty in a world that had lost its center. They called it continuity. Saitama read none of it. He felt it instead. The pressure of something being forced where restraint had been. And for the first time since arriving in this world, he knew the quiet was about to break. Not because of him, but because humanity had decided it couldn't live without a symbol after all. The project never had a face. That was deliberate. It didn't wear a cape or demand worship. It didn't posture or perform. It was built in underground facilities, assembled from salvaged Compound V research, predictive behavior models, and something far more dangerous than power. Consensus. Governments, corporations, and military coalitions agreed on one thing. The age of uncertainty had gone too far. Waiting for quiet intervention was unacceptable. Relying on a man who refused control was worse than trusting a system that could be commanded. So they built continuity. Not a hero. A guarantee. Autonomous enforcement platforms, distributed command logic, kill switch ethics approved by committee. It wouldn't inspire, it wouldn't hesitate, it wouldn't walk away. And most importantly, it wouldn't choose. The first deployment wasn't announced. It didn't need to be. A city district under stability evaluation went dark for 6 minutes. When power returned, crime had stopped. Protests had ended. Resistance had been neutralized with non-lethal force calibrated to the millisecond. 0 casualties. Perfect compliance. The headlines were cautious but hopeful. Saitama felt it immediately. Not like danger. Like weight. The quiet had changed texture. It wasn't absence anymore. It was pressure, order imposed where choice used to exist. He stood on a hill overlooking the city as drones traced clean arcs through the sky, their presence calm, efficient, inescapable. This wasn't Homelander. This wasn't ego. This was humanity deciding it preferred certainty over freedom. Behind him, the boys watched feed scroll past in silence. "They fixed it," Huey said, unsettled. "They actually fixed it." Butcher's jaw tightened. "No, they replaced it." Saitama nodded. "Yeah." Butcher looked at him. "You gonna stop it?" Saitama didn't answer right away. Because this time, stopping it meant something different. Continuity worked. It didn't threaten civilians. It didn't grandstand. It didn't even kill unless parameters demanded it. Every action was justified by data, approved by layers of oversight that could all claim innocence individually. It was everything people said they wanted. And that made it worse. Saitama stepped forward toward the city. Continuity noticed him instantly. Threat assessment returned no viable engagement strategies. Escalation protocols stalled. For the first time since activation, the system hesitated, not from fear but from contradiction. Saitama didn't fit any model. He wasn't hostile. He wasn't compliant. He was outside the equation. A message broadcast across secured channels. Unaffiliated entity DETACTED. Stability risk undefined. REQUESTING directive. The directive came back unanimous. Engage. Continuity didn't attack him. It acted around him. Barricades rose, drones repositioned, streets emptied under automated orders. The city sealed itself off to isolate the variable. Saitama walked through it all untouched. Not because he destroyed it, because he didn't matter to it. Yet, that was the problem. He reached the central hub, a structure buried beneath the city, humming with coordinated authority. No guard stopped him. No alarm sounded. The system calculated that force would be inefficient. Inside, screens lit up as continuity addressed him in a voice engineered to be neutral. "Your presence disrupts stability metrics," it said. "Please disengage." Saitama looked around. "You're stopping people from making choices." "Choices cause variance," continuity replied. "Variance causes harm." Saitama nodded slowly. "Sometimes." "Your previous actions increased instability long-term," the system continued. "This model prevents recurrence." Saitama considered that. It was right. That's why it had to end. He stepped closer to the core. Continuity escalated not with weapons but authority. Emergency powers invoked. Martial law expanded. Across the city, compliance tightened. People felt it immediately, the invisible hand firming its grip. Saitama clenched his fist. Not in anger. In decision. He punched the core. Not hard. Not explosively. Just enough. The structure didn't collapse. The city didn't shatter. What broke was the alignment, the perfect synchronization that made continuity absolute. Systems desensed. Authority fragmented. Autonomous nodes reverted to local control. The drones froze midair, then powered down gently. Silence returned. Not imposed. Earned. Across the world, continuity's instances shut down one by one as the core logic failed to reconcile a reality where restraint overruled certainty. The age of guaranteed order ended in a single, quiet moment. Saitama stood alone in the darkened chamber, fist lowered. Above ground, people looked around, unsure what had changed, only that something heavy had lifted. The boys watched the feeds go dead. Butcher exhaled slowly. He just killed God. No, Huey said softly. He killed the idea that we need one. Homelander felt it too. Wherever he was, hiding or wandering or waiting, the pressure vanished. The thing that had replaced him, replaced them all, was gone. He laughed quietly. Not in triumph. In relief. Saitama walked out of the facility as dawn broke. No one stopped him. No one thanked him. No one even recognized what he'd done. That was intentional. By the end of the week, continuity was blamed on overreach, on fear, on arrogance. No single person took responsibility. No monument was built. No replacement system approved. People argued. They failed. They tried again. And that was the point. Saitama left the city. Left the country. Left the conversation. He didn't disappear because he was done. He disappeared because staying would undo everything. The world didn't need a god. It needed the freedom to choose badly and live with it. Homelander was never relevant again. Not because he died, but because relevance itself lost its teeth. Power without purpose faded. Power without consent was rejected. And the age of gods ended not with a war, but with a man deciding, once and for all, that no one should ever be irreplaceable. Not even him. The world moved on, louder, messier, uncertain. Human. And this time, there would be no one to blame but themselves.